Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Build Show. I'm John Peitzman, JP, certified high-performance coach and creator of the Build Framework. I work with teams and individuals all over the world to help them thrive in their personal and professional lives. And as your host on this show, our aim is to help transform lives one guest at a time. And how do we do that? We do that by having amazing guests. And today is no different. We have with us Major General John Gronski. Major General John Gronski, United States Army, retired, is founder and CEO of Leader Grove, LLC, a leadership consulting firm. He is a leadership trainer, international speaker, and executive coach. He is an author of 2 books, The Ride of Our Lives, Lessons on Life, Leadership, and Love, and Iron-Sharpened Leadership, Transforming Hard-Fought Lessons into Action. John served over 40 years in the U.S. Army and Pennsylvania National Guard at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels. John is a graduate of numerous distinguished Army schools, holds an MBA from Penn State Great Valley, and a master's in strategic studies from the United States Army War College. His many prominent awards include recognition for his work with government armed forces. John's leadership philosophy is based on character, competence, and resilience. And it is my privilege and honor to have him joining us all the way via video technology from the United States of America. John, welcome to The Build Show, and thanks for allowing me to call you John after all that distinguished titling I had in front of me there. So,
no, JP, I'm doing great. I am in Pennsylvania on the East Coast of the United States, and it's really just a pleasure to be with you today.
Right. Well, the pleasure is all ours, as we say. And, before we dive into different things with the Build Framework and the rest of it, I guess the question right now I have is like, what are you excited about right now as we sit here today in the world as it is?
You know what I'm excited about, JP? I'm excited because I've had so many opportunities to get my leadership message out there about Iron-Sharpened Leadership. And I'll be in Orlando, Florida soon to speak at a conference there. And I've got just so many other opportunities to get that message out. And this is one of them. You know, being on your show is another great opportunity. So that's what excites me.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. And I'm very excited to have this conversation as well. I've been looking forward to it. Again, you bring such a unique perspective. And again, I know it's cliche, but I'd like to just say on the front of this, so I don't forget, on behalf of me and everyone, thank you for your service and all that you do. It's just amazing, the leadership capacity and how you touch others. You know, I watched some different videos, of course, and prep for this, and on I think the Senate floor or something, other, officials talking about leadership stories and having, run different things out there, and you just leading the charge, right? Being out in front of everyone and just leading by example, and so many stories that are heartfelt, and you could tell, people tearing up in the house, standing ovations and all the rest of it. So I know that doesn't come without action. That doesn't come without credibility. That doesn't come without heart. Right. And people feel that and they respond to that. And I'm just privileged to have someone like you on the show. So thank you for that. And, as we dive into things, the Build Framework is really a process and a framework that allows us to thrive in our lives, as we know, personally and professionally. For those of you who don't yet know what Build is, it's an acronym. It stands for Build Relationships, Understand the Business, Implement Strategies, Lead and Inspire, and Deliver Excellence. And what I love about this show, John, is that we walk through the Build Framework, and though the Build Framework stays the same and it's pretty consistent, everyone has a unique spin on that and unique stories and unique insights that allow people to kind of resonate and relate to how that can actually positively impact their lives. So let's go on the journey, shall we?
I love it. Yes, let's do it.
That's right. So let's start with build relationships. So if you look at the category of B, build relationships, and I know this, with you, we could talk about each of these for at least an hour each, I'm sure. But just touching on maybe the most essential elements of that category of build relationships, maybe some of the most important relationships you've had, either personally or professionally, or the context of how that's so important to you as you get your message out around the world. But what do you have to say with your vast experience on the category of build relationships for our listeners out there today?
Yeah, I love that you start your framework with build relationships. Because I really think relationships is the currency of the 21st century. Any success we have in life is based on relationships that we have with other people. And I think one of the most important things we could do, and this was actually brought to my attention by a mentor probably about 20 years ago. And that mentor said to me, in our lives, we will have certain positions, we'll work for certain companies, work for certain organizations, or we might go to various schools and training opportunities. And when we're working for those companies or we're conducting that training, we make friends. We make friends with the people we're working with or the people we're training with or going to school with. He said the trick and the key is to maintain those relationships as we continue through life, and just don't let them die on the vine. And certainly, over the course of one's life, we can't maintain every single relationship that we've encountered. But what we have to do is really the people that we value, the people that we've really made a special connection with, we have to work hard to maintain those type of relationships. So I really think it's people, not things, that nurture our souls and really make us what we are. And I just love that first part of your framework. I think is so key.
Yeah, and that's great. And what strategies do you have, if any, from the standpoint of actually executing that? Because it's a great concept, as they say, right? But the proof is in the pudding, right? So do you find yourself following a certain protocol to be able to maintain those relationships that are important? And if so, what is that?
Yeah, well, I think it's important for leaders to be able to relate appropriately to their followers and the people they lead, and also the families of the folks they lead. I'll give you a quick example. Right after 9/11, I had to take 2,000 soldiers over to Europe to do a force protection mission on U.S. installations through, 4 countries in Europe. And I had 2,000 soldiers spread across 4 different countries. And as I would travel around to engage those soldiers and make sure they had the resources they need to do their job properly and make sure they were being taken care of, I would actually take a picture with them. And then and this is kind of analog days here, right after 9/11, take an analog picture. Then I would ask them what loved one they would want that picture sent to. I would write a handwritten note to their loved one of choice. It could be a daughter, it could be a son, mother, father, spouse. And I would send that picture back with a handwritten note. I did that for well over 300 soldiers. 10 years after that, I would still have family members coming up to me at various venues and events and thanking me for that picture that I sent back to them. I would have soldiers 10, 12 years after the fact thanking me for those pictures I sent back home. So I think we have to look for ways to show our followers that we appreciate what they do and show their family members how important their loved one is to the organization which they're a part of. And a caveat to that, every week I'll pick a few people to send a handwritten note to. I think there's so much power in handwritten notes because we get inundated with emails, but to send a handwritten note to someone who meant something to us somewhere in our life and let them know we're thinking about them and thanking them for what they've done for us to support us. I think that's just a great way to maintain some of those relationships.
That's amazing. And I think that you're absolutely right. The handwritten note is a dying art. A lot of people can't even write that well anymore because, like, literally, it's texting and texting. And there's so many examples. And this is just yet another one of the memories and impact of a handwritten note from whether it's, yourself or, in the military, or an executive who, leaves a handwritten note. Thanks for the time. People kind of keep that and they come up to that executive or yourself years later and say, oh, you know what? That actually inspired me to stay or to do this or to whatever, to be my best self, right? And it's so important. And we, I think, forget that as individuals and as leaders, the impact that these things can have, right? And it takes a couple seconds, right? I mean, it takes mindfulness and intention, but it really doesn't, it doesn't take a lot of money, doesn't take a lot of expense, right? It just takes a lot of mindfulness and ability to say, this is important for me. I'm going to take the time to do this.
Yeah, for sure. Think about the last handwritten note you got. thanking you for something sincerely, or just from an acquaintance who said, hey, just want to reach out to you and let you know I'm thinking about you. It has such a great impact because it means somebody actually had to put pen to paper, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, mail it. It just takes a little bit more work than typing out an email or a text message.
Yep, I think you're right. I think it has actually more impact nowadays because of the rarity of it, right? And it's almost like, just like not how people communicate a lot of times. So yeah, I think that's a great strategy. And thanks for sharing that, because again, in all these things we say, it's always good to, I think, give people a little taste of, okay, what's something I can do to, as I always say, operationalize it, right? Because the concepts are great and most people agree with, oh yes, maintain relationships sounds great, but how do I do that? And how do I do that in a unique way that actually has a lot of impact? And I think we just touched on that for sure. So thank you for that. And again, we could spend the whole time talking about relationships. We might loop back around. All these things are, centrifugal looping. They all connect to each other, obviously, but we'll move on for now to you understand the business. So, I mean, there's so much you understand in the business of life. I love the first book you had about the traveling on the bike. I glanced through that. That's amazing. And also in business too, and military specifically, understanding that business. But what do you think is an important concept or understanding the business that is important to share with our listeners today?
Yeah. One thing I learned just in general is I grew up in a family business. My father was a World War II veteran, and in 1954, he opened up a garage, began repairing cars, began selling automobiles, and I grew up in that business. And what business means to me is it's all about taking care of the customer, and it's all about doing whatever you have to do to ensure that customer is satisfied. So I think focusing on customer satisfaction, which means actually listening to the customer, finding out what the customer wants and then providing that in terms of your product or service. So I think that is really the key to understanding your business, is understanding what the customer wants and then providing that to them.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm sure you have many, many examples of where you've done that effectively, but also probably, we learn from our mistakes a lot of times too, as they say. And so many, I think, individuals out there don't really listen to the customer, which you really clearly articulated, that to, understand what their need is versus thinking they understand what the customer needs, right? Even from a product delivery thing. It's all like, well, they need this, so we're going to force this on them, or this is the solution, right? Instead of actually listening. So do you have an example on either end, or maybe one of each, I don't know, of where you truly listened to a customer and were able to navigate that space more effectively, or maybe a time when you didn't and it kind of was a lesson learned?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of what I call, and what the military actually calls, an after-action review. So, for example, if I do a 1-day or a 2-day leadership workshop, at the end of that session, I always take the time to do an after-action review with those who attended the session. I will ask them, hey, what did we cover here that really worked with you? What do you think, if I do this workshop again for another group, what do you think I should sustain and make sure I do again? And then I'll ask them, what do you think I could improve upon? If I was going to do this for another group next week, what would you want to see me change? And I'm very interested to hear what they have to say at the end of the session. So I could then, and I've made plenty of changes. I've been doing this since I retired from the Army in 2019. And over the course of the last, 3 or 4 years, through that exercise of conducting an after-action review, I've made many different changes to the way I present, to the topics that I present on. For example, I was getting a lot of requests for, hey, how do I lead up? How do I communicate with my boss to help influence them in some way? And so I added that to a 2-day workshop that I do, for example. So I think that's an idea of what folks listening to this podcast could do in order to really listen to the customer, do that after-action review, find out not only what you can improve upon, but what you should sustain, and then just focus on sustaining what the customer says you sustain, focus on improving what they make a suggestion on improving, and just go from there. But I think that's a great technique.
Yeah, I love that, the after action review. And it's basically a debrief, right? And I love taking, again, some of the military concepts that you can share. I know there's a lot you can't share, but that you can share to civilians to be able to kind of operationalize this stuff. And I think the important thing I heard there from you is that you have to actually then make the change, or at least consider it. You might not change everything based upon just the opinions, but I think there are so many situations where people may think they're doing the right thing by, yeah, okay, I'll give a survey out there to people to, you know, tell me how I did. But guess what? The survey falls on deaf ears, as they say, and it just goes into a pile. Maybe they don't even read it, right? And they just go on and on and on doing the same thing. And yet they think in their mind, well, yeah, no, I put a survey out there, right? But it really doesn't make the impact it can if you don't actually listen to the results and then do something about it. And that's what I heard you say very clearly, is that, like, you changed a lot of things based upon that feedback. And I'm sure you didn't, you know, caveat to everyone that, you know, gives an idea, because you can't please everyone, as they say, but you took kind of the themes, it sounds like, and the things that made you go, oh, yeah, that one makes sense, right? So I'm going to do that and apply that and change things. And that is what allows us to continue to evolve and to continue to allow our audience to evolve too, because you're literally listening to them and allowing your deliverable to be more attached to what they're actually asking for.
You know, JP, you said a few very important things there. You're right. It's not just a one-off suggestion you might get from somebody, but it's a theme that occurs. You know, if you keep hearing the same thing from different groups and different people, now you've got a theme, and now you could make a change based on that theme. The other thing I want to point out is, you know, lessons learned are okay, but lessons applied are even better. Because how many times do we learn a lesson that we don't take the time to apply? So I think doing the hard work of applying what you learn is really the key to moving forward and improving your business.
Right. And then the lesson is truly learned, and not a lesson you have to learn again and again and again and again, which happens if you don't actually apply the lesson learned, right? And take that knowledge, exactly, as we say, and turn it into wisdom, because that is what wisdom is. It's the application of knowledge that you have learned, right? So with that, let's move on to I, which is implement strategies, right? So we build relationships, we understand the business, and then we implement strategies based upon those relationships and the understandings that we have. What about implement strategies do you think that is appropriate to share with the audience today, given your vast experience on implementing so many types of strategies throughout the world?
Yeah, I mean, you know, just things I've learned from the military is you've got to ask the opinions of your followers. You have to allow yourself to be vulnerable as a leader. When I talk about leader vulnerability, I'm talking about a few things. First of all, you do have to move out of your comfort zone. You have to allow yourself to be open to trying new things and testing out new ideas. You have to be open to asking your followers what their opinion is. As the leader, guess what? You don't need to have all the answers. If you had all the answers, you wouldn't need a team around you. The purpose of the team is so they could contribute to the good of the organization. So I think those are two keys in terms of implementing, which will help whatever business you run, whatever type of organization you run, you know, get on the right path to success.
I'm sure in your space, and again, only what you can obviously share, but either personally, and it might be, you know, attached to something that's even non-military potentially, but I have to imagine that there are some strategies that have just been really, really challenging. And if I think just in my naive mind about the military situations that you just talked about, even force, you know, protection and all the things, that those have to be challenging environments. So what do you have to say to people out there who are maybe not dealing with as many life and death kind of critical real-time situations as that, but where they have a strategy that might be really complicated and really challenging, and yet it's really important to implement? I mean, what do you do, or advice can you give to help them really continue to achieve, you know, excellence in that arena?
Yeah. JP, I'm glad you asked that question. I recall back 2005, 2006, I commanded a brigade of 5,000 soldiers and Marines in Ramadi, Iraq. And at that point in time, Ramadi, Iraq was known as the most dangerous place on the face of the earth. So it was very chaotic, very violent, very dangerous environment. And when we went into that operation, the main focus of our mission was to kill and detain insurgents, our enemies, those working against us. And as we continued with our operations, we gained insight. And the insight we gained is you cannot kill your way out of an insurgency. So we changed our focus from killing and detaining the bad guys to protecting the populace. And there's a whole different mindset you have then when you have that change. The reason I bring that up is it's important for organizational leaders, business leaders to understand that sometimes you really have to look at what you believe your mission is and be prepared to pivot as the situation changes and as you gain new information. The other caveat to that is you have to understand what your purpose is. Why does your organization do what it does? And do your people understand that purpose? Because purpose is powerful. Purpose is going to provide your followers the drive they need to take your organization to the next level. So I think being prepared to pivot and really communicating that purpose and articulating that purpose is really key.
I love that, because what you're saying there too is that the end result's still going to be the same, right? Success hasn't changed as far as the understanding of how you identified that, but the mindset and how you go about it can make all the difference. Like you said, you can't kill your way to that end result, right? You can have a different understanding of how to apply different tactics, but the end result is still the same, which is a success, but you do it in a different way. And I think that's so applicable to so many cultures of organizations today, because they're so focused maybe on a certain mindset because they think that's the only way to get where they need to go, not understanding, well, they can get where they need to go maybe even quicker by shifting their mindset.
Yeah. And think of it as a leader, a lot of times you have to give one of your followers, one of your employees, a task. So you tell them what to do. And sometimes leaders who aren't so good will forget to tell them why they need to do it. I think providing that why is key, because if you don't provide the why, if somebody hits a roadblock when you're trying to do the what part of that task and they don't understand the why, they're going to stop. They're going to be stuck in their tracks. But if they understand the intent behind it, if they understand the why, even if they can't accomplish the what specifically, they could pivot a little bit, focus on a little bit different way to do something. And as long as the why is accomplished, as long as the purpose is accomplished, then you have an achieved mission success.
100%. And I think that segues very nicely into L, which is lead and inspire. We have obviously talked a lot about that in our space so far with BUIL. But when you talk about specifically L, lead and inspire, what comes to mind as far as anything you'd like to share with the audience today?
This is an easy one. It's my leadership philosophy, which I call Iron-Sharpened Leadership. It's about leading with character, having leader competence, and also being a resilient leader. I'm just going to explain those three things very, very quickly for you. When we talk about leading with character, we're talking about understanding what your core values are. Those core values are things that you're going to stand for even when your back is against the wall. It's about cultivating trust in an organization, because think about it. Trust is the lifeblood of any organization. You've got to establish that trust with those you lead in order to be able to accomplish the tasks that you're trying to achieve in your organization. So you have to do those things. And then you also have to care about your people. And when I talk about a leader caring about their people, I'm not just talking about going around and slapping them on the back and telling them they're doing a great job and, hey, how's your wife and kids doing? I'm talking about focusing on hey, what resources do your folks need so they can do their job more effectively? And what obstacles might be in their way that they don't have the authority to remove, but you as a leader have that authority to remove? And I think the best way to show your people that you lead, that you care about them, is by removing obstacles and providing resources that they need. I'll talk about leader competence quickly. When I talk about leader competence, I'm talking about providing a vision, also providing that purpose that we already talked about. I'm talking about having the courage to make decisions, even with imperfect information. And I'm also talking about communicating well and developing your followers, because I think the task of any leader is to develop future leaders for that particular organization. And then when I talk about resilience, I'm talking about having positive energy and being optimistic. And when I talk about optimism, it means a leader has to believe that tomorrow is going to be better than today, and having a plan to go along with that optimism. It's being fit. And yeah, I'm talking about physical fitness, but I'm also talking about mental fitness, emotional fitness, spiritual fitness, in order to become a resilient leader and a resilient person. And I'm talking about vulnerability. And I think I mentioned vulnerability a little bit earlier, about moving out of your comfort zone, asking the people who work for you what their opinions are, and not having such an ego that you don't want to ask people what they think. And then sharing stories with the people that follow you. What type of stories? Share stories about times you failed and how you were able to overcome those failures. Talk about times you made a mistake and how you were able to overcome those mistakes. I think when you share stories like that, you inspire others.
I love that. And, it's a three-tiered approach, right? Character, competence, and resilience. And I loved so much about what you said there with, the idea that you have to have a plan. As I always say, hopium is not a drug you take where everything just results and it's there, right? So you have to have that hope and, like you say, the vision and mission, but you have to have a plan as a leader too. And one of the most important things that I'd love to echo here is that a leader's job is to do exactly what you said. It's like, show the direction, but then get out of the way and then be there to support your troops, literally and figuratively, in the sense of what do they need to be successful, but also what you really articulated well, which is what obstacles can you remove for them that they may have a challenge actually being able to do that, right? So it's not just giving them the resources, but it's also looking at the landmines, no pun intended there, of what's in front of them to be able to actually remove those successfully so that we can all be successful together. So I love that. Character, competence, and resilience, 100%. So moving on to D, deliver excellence. It all comes together in the heart with delivering excellence. I would love to hear, your insight on what excellence means to you and how you ensure that you do your best to deliver excellence each and every day.
Yeah, when you talk about excellence in most businesses, you're talking about, being able to produce that product or service that you're called upon to produce. You're talking about creating a safe environment, so your employees feel, physically safe and emotionally safe in the work that they do. You're talking about making a profit, or if you're talking about a governmental organization or a nonprofit organization, at least staying within budget. You're talking about things like that. And there's two elements of the environment that allow you to achieve those particular goals. One is the infrastructure element. That's the infrastructure you have, the machines in a factory, or the truck on a construction site, or a computer system, in a IT type of business. The stuff that you need, the hard stuff you need to do your work. The other part of the environment is what I call the interpersonal environment. And that's where really we talk about leadership, and that's where leadership matters. How you communicate with people. Do you treat people with dignity and respect? Do you provide a purpose? Do you not only tell them what to do, but why they need to do it? All of those things wrapped up create the environment that a business operates in. And to get true customer satisfaction, which I really think is the hallmark of delivering on excellence, is the customer satisfied, is the customer happy. You need all those things to come together to achieve that customer satisfaction and ultimately accomplish your mission or make that profit.
Right. And I think you're absolutely right. It's about, in the build framework, I talk about the heart connection of deliver excellence, which is to feel it. Or I also mentioned the value of the vibe, right? But that's all about that energy. It's all about the experience that that customer has, right? The stakeholders and the fact that you're able to really exceed their expectations, because that's what excellence is all about, right? They have a certain expectation and then you exceed that. Well, who can argue that that, is excellence in action? So I think that is really important insight that you just shared with us today about how to make that
happen. And I think the way you do that is get the customer to define success. How does the customer define success? And then find ways that you could add value. And I think, you said it by exceeding expectations. I like to call it adding value, but we're talking about the same thing.
Absolutely. And speaking of adding value, we've walked through the build framework now. Is there any additional value add that we haven't talked about that you'd like to share with the audience that you think is important to mention now?
No, I would just like to say, we have to keep our families in mind as well. It's all well and good to run a successful enterprise, to, treat your employees the way the employees need to be treated. But I think we also have to take the time to focus on our families. And just as we look at leading our employees with dignity and respect and all those things we already talked about when it comes to leadership, we have to apply those same leadership concepts to our families. And I think if, leaders of organizations remember that, at the end of the day, they'll just have a much more fulfilled life.
Absolutely. And I love how that not only applies to the leaders' families, but if you propagate that out, that's about the families of the employees too. It's a broader family. I mean, in a sense, the company is a family, right? But the family, by extension, includes the families of the family, right? And supporting the fact that people, really, don't live to work, you work to live, right? And having that blend and that balance and ability to make sure that, we have our priorities straight and we know that it's about family first in the cases where, we want to really have to support that. And so many companies don't put that front and center. And I really appreciate you mentioning that so that people can be reminded of sometimes the obvious things that's common sense, but not common practice. So thank you for that.
JP,
go ahead.
In the military, we have a saying that you recruit a soldier, but you re-enlist the family. And I think as people running businesses look at how to retain employees, you brought up the great point there. It's you enlist that employee into your company, but in order to retain that employee, you've really got to bring the family into the picture. And if the family is happy with the culture at that employee's place of work, it's probably more likely that employee is going to stay with the company. And the other thing to remember is this: employees do not leave companies. Employees leave leaders. Because think of how many employees might be working in a particular industry. And if they leave a company, generally they go to another company in the same industry. So it's not that they're leaving the industry or the company, they're probably leaving the leader that they had to work for. That's why being a character-based servant leader is so important.
Absolutely. And they've statistically proven through all the results globally that the number one retention factor is, you named it, the relationship with your immediate supervisor, right? More than title, more than compensation, more than anything else, it's that relationship. So I think that that's so important to remember as we continue to navigate all these waters. So look, it's been a great conversation. How can people get a hold of you or reach you, your website? I mean, what method should they go after if they want to stay in contact with you or learn more about your services and offerings?
Yeah, I have two websites that are connected to one another. One is johngronski.com, JOHNGRONSKI.com, and the other one is leadergrove.com. And on those websites, I have a tremendous amount of free leadership resources that people could go to the website and have access to those free leadership development resources. And you could also order signed copies of both of my books on my website. So I would invite people to go to those websites and please continue to develop as a leader by taking advantage of the material on those websites.
Thank you. And I hope everyone listening takes advantage of that amazing offer and goes there and takes a look at everything that there is to download and learn about on those sites. So, John, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's been an honor and privilege to have this conversation with you.
JP, my pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation.
And thank all of you for joining us here as well. For more great resources to help you become your best self, make sure to check out thebuildframework.com. That's it for this episode. I'm JP. We'll see you next time on The Build Show.